Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are live from my lovely Brooklyn apartment. It is Saturday afternoon in March. It's starting to become spring. It's still a little cold, but the sun is out. It's a lovely time of year in New York City. And I am here, and we are going to have a great conversation about politics, about what's going on in the world, about the upcoming election, and about so many other issues. And I have so much of that lovely beverage that will not be named, that diet soda with which I will not give a shout out to the brand. And I am excited. We are going to talk. We are going to have a good conversation. Shout out to Ronnie Miller. Welcome, welcome, Ronnie. Shout out to other folks who are joining us. Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to spread the message. Shout out to Lisa Hauserman. Glad to have you joining us. Be sure to put this on Twitter. Be sure to put this on your Facebook. Be sure to make this a big conversation. Shout out to Miriam and Joe. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to tweet this out. This is going to be a great afternoon chat. So much to talk about. So much to talk about. I am going to open up and pour that diet soda, that beverage that will not be named, that I love to drink on days like this. That lovely, lovely synthetic beverage, that diet soda, that beverage with which I will not give a shout out to because they are not paying me for product placement and because I do not endorse the policies of the corporation. I just love to drink their soda. Wow, what a day it is, folks. What a day it is. So much to talk about today. I've been thinking about the two big political parties in the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans. And I've been thinking about what an enigma it is, how strange it is the way things are going. When I was a kid, the Republicans were kind of the ruling party. The Bush years, before the Bush years you had Clinton, but Clinton was kind of not really loved by the mainstream media and was always being accused of scandals. It's crazy times, but it seems like the Democrats in more and more are becoming the party of the establishment, and it's becoming really bizarre how the Democrats have come. But the weird thing is, it's like, the Republican Party, for a long time, it was a wide variety of forces, but now, lo and behold, I'm going to drink some of my soda. It seems like more and more the Republican Party is becoming the party of bitter old men. That's right. The Republican Party has become the party of very, very bitter old men. You know that grandfather of yours or that old relative in your family who was always like, oh my God, back in the day America was a great country and now it's not a great country anymore and I want to make America great again. Remember that relative of yours who was always saying things to the effect of, I'm not racist, but, right? You got to think about some old cop who's about to retire, and he's frustrated, and he's walking around, these kids out there with their rap music and their skateboards, and they're not respecting me, and everyone's politically correct, and I'm angry. I mean, if you look at the folks in the Trump administration, look at Elliott Abrams, right? Look at for example, John Bolton, right? These are foreign policy guys. These are what you could call Sovietologists, or Kremlinologists. They graduated from Harvard and Yale and schools like that in the 1980s, and they spent their entire careers learning about communism, how to study communism. Communism was the enemy. They knew all about communism. They were going to fight against communism. And lo and behold, just as they were coming into the peak of their careers, the Soviet Union fell. Oops, they're a little bit confused. So they have no clue what they're going to do, but they're bitter old men, and they don't like the commies, and they remember Ronald Reagan. So lo and behold, it seems that the Trump administration has told them that they can go after Venezuela. All right, guys, they're commies, they're Marxists, it's Latin America, South America, commies, you got this, right? You studied this, you learned how to do this in school, go after them. And they're having the time of their lives. And Elliott Abrams up there, oh my God, these communists, I'm the special envoy for Venezuela, even though I was convicted of crimes and lying to Congress about sending weapons to Contras. And John Bolton's up there, it's like, I'm gonna send Nicolas Maduro to Guantanamo if he's not careful. Why? Because I'm a tough old, and they're having the time of their lives. This is a script they've been rehearsing since they were college students. Since they were my age, they've been rehearsing America's a land of freedom, and he's a commie, he's a dirty commie, communist. They've been rehearsing this. It's the party of bitter old men who don't like politically correct language and think America used to be a great country and it's not anymore, and it makes them mad, and that's the Republican Party. It is a Republican Party of old, bitter, angry men, right? That's the Republican Party. And you can pretty much sum it up that way, right? And that's Trump, that's his base, America first. It's like you talk to that older person, right? And on the one hand, they're saying, why are we wasting all this money on all these wars? Why are we going around the world trying to help all these other people? Why don't we put America first? That's one sentence, and then like an hour later, you'll be talking to them, and they'll be like, man, why don't we all go down there and invade Venezuela and overthrow those commies? And you say, well, I thought you said you didn't want us to be meddling. And they're like, I don't know, I remember Ronald Reagan, it was that's the Republican Party, right? The Republican Party, and that's why they're bumbling. They don't know what they're about. They're about bitterness. They're about the fact that the United States is no longer the top dog that it once was. They're bitter about the fact that the economy is not where it once was. They're bitter, they're old, and they're looking to the past, and they're thinking if we could just restore the 1980s. And it's hilarious, because in the Reagan times, they were saying if we could just restore the 1940s, right? Or the 1950s, right? They were talking about the good old days in the 50s. This is a group of people that are backward looking. They're bitter and they're frustrated. A lot of what they're bitter and frustrated about is very, very legitimate, because the United States has been deindustrialized. It's been hurt. The jobs, the standard of living has gone down. There's a lot to be bitter about, and I'll give them that. But it's just this kind of pessimism of elderly old men who are frustrated, and their anger about the economy, their anger about global affairs fits in with their anger about young people and their rap music, and they're beginning their sentences with I'm not racist, but there you go. That's the Republican Party, right? And as much as it's easy, it's so cheap to pick on the Republican Party and Trump. It is so easy. It is, mainstream media loves it, right? To yell at Trump for, what did he say this week, that this naughty word that he said. What did Trump do? He did this that was offensive. He's nasty. He's offensive. And it's easy. It is quite easy to go after them, right? And that's basically what the Republican Party is becoming. It's becoming the Republican Party of bitter, angry older folks. But the Democratic Party is in a very, very strange place, because you got the Republican Party that is this party of kind of bitter, elderly pessimism. But the Democratic Party has got two contradictory wings in it. On the one hand, you have got some of the most amazing people in the country. I met them, I interviewed them. Watch my video if you haven't watched it yet. I went to the Bernie Sanders rally. These young people that are part of the Bernie Sanders campaign, part of the Tulsi Gabbard campaign, they are like the salt of the earth. These are young people. They're in the prime of their lives, their early 20s, and they are worried about the future of their country, but they're full of hope and optimism. They want to make things better. And they are like, you know what? I'm worried about the standard of living dropping. I'm worried about the danger of new wars. I'm worried about climate change. I want to make things better in my country. And, we need to stand up to these big corporations. Why can't we have a social democratic welfare state? Most Western countries do give people free healthcare, free college. Why can't we do it too? And they're smiling, and they're asking tough questions, and they're worried about the future of their country. They want to have kids at some point. They want to just have a good working class life, but they're looking at the economy the way it is now, and it's not looking like something they can have, and they're worried, but they're still full of optimism, right? They're in the spring of their youth. They're hopeful. They want to make a better country. These kids are like the salt of the earth, the cream of the crop, right? These are everything that you associate with goodness, with young, hopeful idealism. That's where they're at. And that's one section of the Democratic Party. And I would say probably among people who vote for the Democratic Party, that's the majority. But then, also within the Democratic Party, you have got the most evil forces that you can ever imagine, right? You have got the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the DuPonts, the wealthy, entrenched circles of power in the United States, these old money billionaire autocrats, these elite global monopolists, the banking elite, the folks who run the world, right? You have got the old entrenched circles of super wealthy people. and they are also running the Democratic Party. They don't like Trump because he's appealing to the common people and because he's stirring people up and because he talked against wars. They don't like Trump, but they also don't like Bernie. And when it gets down to it, a lot of them would prefer Trump over Bernie, right? They just hate the Bernie Sanders movement so much. And they are about preserving the power of the elite. And they've got Kamala Harris, and they've got Cory Booker, and they've got Prisons for Profit, and they've got the NSA, and they've got Hate Russia and Russiagate, and they've got Hate China and World War III, and oh my goodness. The Republicans of this party, of this kind of, you can almost laugh at them, this cynical, critical, pessimistic old folks who just don't like the way the world is and it's just not working out for them and they're mad about it and Trump is going to figure it and they don't know what the answer is and they don't really exactly know what's wrong and they're confused and one day they say one thing and the next day they say another thing. But the Democratic Party has two distinct poles within it. It's got your Bernie-crats full of hope, full of optimism, not me, us. What can we do to help our country? We're in a crisis. We have got so many issues. We need a government that will do something about it. Full of hope, full of smiles, full of dreams, full of optimism. And then you have those sinister forces in the background. Those ExxonMobil, Chase Bank, Goldman Sachs. I mean, you have got these forces in the background. They don't like Trump and don't like the new right in Europe because it gets in the way of their profits. But they obviously don't like Bernie Sanders, and they don't like leftism either. It's bizarre. You have got this fading bitterness and republicanism, and then you have the very best and the very worst smushed into one party, the Democratic Party. It is really, really, really bizarre. It is night and day. There are two Democratic parties at this point. There is the Democratic Party of Bernie-crats and democratic socialism and optimism and youth. And there is the Democratic Party of Prisons for Profit, of the Pentagon, of the intelligence agencies, of ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron, and Shell Oil, of the global Wall Street banking elite, of the Silicon Valley overlords, of the sinister forces that rule the country and see Trump as a threat for completely different reasons. That's where we're at in the United States right now. And I don't know what just happened with my stabilizer there, but I hope that it can come back on. There we go. There we go. That's where we're at. And yes, someone's asking me, did you notice that they are ramping up anti-China propaganda? Oh yes, I absolutely did notice that they are ramping up anti-China propaganda. You should see the weekend review section of the Wall Street Journal this week. The front page, anti-China, right? The op-eds, they are whipping up anti-China fervor all across the country right now. China is public enemy number one as far as these folks are concerned. And you know why? You know why they're going after China? Simple. China is making better products. China's economy is marching ahead. China is advancing. China is getting wealthier. And because of that, Wall Street and London see them as a threat. Huawei Technologies. Huawei, the correct pronunciation, someone told me. I'm sure that's not even correct, but Huawei Technologies. They are going after them. They are making some cutting-edge phones. You're watching this on an iPhone. This is coming through an iPhone. If you were watching this on a Huawei phone, the video would be far, far higher quality. It would be far, far better if you were watching this. I mean, the cameras that they've got on their new P20 Pro are just amazing. I mean, you wouldn't believe what they've done. It is some amazing stuff they've got going on there. I'm going to change my shot here, so just hold your breath 1 minute while we change the camera shot. But it is amazing what they have done. And there is this hatred, this absolute hatred now for Huawei Technologies. They're saying that because Huawei is tied in with the Chinese government, because there are Chinese military people on the board of Huawei Technologies, that these phones are a threat to national security. But here's the thing, folks, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. On the basis that they are banning Huawei phones, they could just as easily, in any other country in the world, ban iPhones or ban Android phones made in the United States. Why? Because we know that those companies provide a backdoor to the NSA, right? A backdoor entrance. They could just as easily ban those phones on the basis of it, right? We know that not only has the U.S. government been working with the cell phone giants in the United States, Verizon, AT&T, Not only has it been working with them, it's been working with them and actually, well, to violate treaties. They have been spying on UN missions. The UN missions have been spied on. That was revealed by WikiLeaks, right? And so at this point, they are using the cell phone companies, Verizon, Apple, all of them. We all know they're all tied in with the NSA. They're all tied in with the intelligence agencies. They're all tied in with the Pentagon. Their relationship is solid and gold. However, we're supposed to be expecting the Chinese government to be 1,000 miles away from Huawei Technologies, which is the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, which is a corporation that the Chinese Communist Party basically built. It was part of Deng Xiaoping's theories. Deng Xiaoping theory, you have the concept of building up these kind of state-controlled super corporations that benefit the whole country. I'm going to move up closer so you can be a little closer to me. So just hold tight there. Sorry, we're shaking a lot here. So the Chinese government built Huawei. It's like a super corporation, you could say. It is a very powerful corporation. It's one of those staples of the Deng Xiaoping era, where the government and the private sector work together, and they build these kind of mega corporations that ultimately work and operate within the government's central plan. It's socialism with Chinese characteristics. And Huawei Technologies, the Chinese steel manufacturing corporations that have been constructed, there's a whole lot of these companies that are basically built up to serve socialism with Chinese characteristics. Huawei Technologies is private. It's legally a cooperative under Chinese law. But yes, there are people in the military who are on its board of directors, right? And why should we be shocked by that? Especially when American corporations work with the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies left and right. So it's a huge, huge double standard. But a lot going on in politics. I couldn't resist. I'm going to talk a lot about International Women's Day, right? Yesterday was International Women's Day, a communist holiday. Bet you didn't know that, but it was Marxists and communists who created International Women's Day. It was International Working Women's Day, created by the Socialist International in 1909. And then eventually, the Soviet Union had March 8th as a national holiday to honor women workers. And then in 1974, you had the UN passing it. Now it's global. But I came across this article, right? Fire in Bangladesh, right? At a clothing factory in Bangladesh. We have, the chemicals that are used to dye clothes at a garment factory in Bangladesh. And women workers, at least 70 of them dying in a fire, and apartment buildings, and it was just a horrendous fire that happens. And this isn't the first time this has happened either, right? This is not the first time we've seen factory fires and fires in garment factories in Bangladesh, right? Jeffrey Sachs, the neoliberal economist, who is the big hero of even a lot of liberal forces at this point, but he was all about neoliberalism at one point. Now he's a little more social democratic, a little more Keynesian, I guess you could say. But Jeffrey Sachs famously, he said that sweatshops are the stepladder to development. Well, look at Bangladesh, right? They've got sweatshops for sure. They've got sweatshops, right? They've been having factory fires where people who stitch the clothes they make at Walmart are getting paid poverty wages and worked ridiculously hard to sew clothes, and getting burned alive in fires where the factory owners in some instances have even locked the doors so that people can't get out, right? That's been happening. And Jeffrey Sachs thinks that this is leading to progress, right? That these sweatshops, these horrendous sweatshops, these are the stepping stones of progress, right? Eventually they're going to have these sweatshops, and then the standard of living will go up, and gradually these sweatshops are going to bring people out of poverty. But if you look at Bangladesh, that has not happened, right? These sweatshops have not led people out of poverty in Bangladesh. The road out of poverty is not with sweatshops. The road out of poverty is with high-speed railway, and power plants, and electrical facilities, and water treatment facilities, and modern roads, and modern housing, and government funding of scientific research. It's infrastructure that brings development. It is not sweatshops where people are worked to death and treated in horrendous conditions. People have been protesting the factory conditions in Bangladesh for years. I can remember 5-6 years ago, I was marching through Lower Manhattan as an activist, protesting against some of these stores that had products that were made in these factory fires in Bangladesh. And International Women's Day, that's why I brought it up, International Women's Day started out as a holiday honoring the people here in New York City, the women, the working women who died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, right? These women, they were sewing garments here in New York. A lot of them were Eastern European or Irish, and they were working to the bone, working long hours in this factory, at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and they're making clothes, and the bosses locked the door, and they burned. They burned to death. It was a horrendous incident that was known all over the world. These women were killed in this horrendous fire. And in the aftermath of that fire, to honor working women and the struggles that they go through, that's how International Women's Day came into being. It was a communist holiday to celebrate working women struggling to get by in a society where the bosses and the bankers are constantly trying to turn their lives into profits, right? And it was the Socialist International, the Second International, that voted to make International Women's Day, March 8th, a holiday, International Working Women's Day. And actually, among one of the delegates that voted at the International Congress of the Socialist International to make International Women's Day a holiday was a young man by the name of Vladimir Lenin. That's right, Vladimir Lenin was a delegate, and he voted to make International Women's Day a holiday. And here, over 100 years later, we are still dealing with the horrendous realities that International Women's Day was set up to honor those who fought against. Just like May Day was originated in the United States to honor those who fight against fight for the 8-hour workday. International Women's Day was set up to honor the working women who have been treated so badly on the job and basically killed by the horrendous conditions that their bosses put them under. And yet, still today, global capitalism, which Jeffrey Sachs says these sweatshops, these garment factories, they're the step ladders to progress. That is exactly what International Women's Day was formed to fight against. And we're still facing these same problems. Crazy, crazy times, folks. Crazy, crazy times. The bosses are in an anti-communist frenzy, telling us that China is the big enemy. And I believe, very famously, they don't know what to think of China, just like they didn't know what to think of the Soviet Union at one point, right? I know Winston Churchill very famously said at the time of the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, he said, the Soviet Union is a mystery wrapped in an enigma. They did not know what to make of the Soviet Union. And today, they don't know what to make of China. China doesn't make any sense to them, right? Basically, China has figured out how to have socialism and sneakers, right? Interesting conversation. When I was in Russia, I was talking with a young woman who had lived through the fall of the Soviet Union. She was telling me it was horrendous. The fall of the Soviet Union was an economic disaster for Russia, but that in the 1996 elections, she did not vote for the Communist Party. And why did she not vote for the Communist Party? She said, because even though everything was so awful at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, even though people were dying in mass, she was excited about the fact that she was actually able to go buy some fancy new sneakers. In the time of the Soviet Union, you couldn't buy fancy consumer goods, fancy new sneakers. And so she couldn't bring herself to vote for the Communist Party because she was excited about having new sneakers. And that was basically how global capitalism framed the debate. You can have socialism or sneakers, right? Yes, you can have socialism, you can have guaranteed jobs, guaranteed health care, but you can't have consumer goods. You're going to have a level of poverty, you're going to have a level of stability, but you're going to have a level of poverty. But China has figured out how to have both socialism and sneakers, right? In China, you can have billionaires, but you can also have the state controlling the economy and taking care of people, right? Now, we don't have a situation where people have to pick between socialism and sneakers. China has got socialism and sneakers. They have got socialism that is based on Deng Xiaoping's very, very famous statement, poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious, right? That you can have the state controlling the economy, but you can also have people working very, very hard, becoming wealthy, and living a decent life. There's not a trap. Socialism is no longer a trap. It's no longer poverty for the benefit of all society. It's no longer trading wealth for stability. Oh no, now China has figured out, with their 5-year plans and their state-controlled megacorporations and their 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party, how they can control and regulate the economy with the means of production being operated according to a rational plan, but at the same time, people can still live out their dreams, invest, start new companies, start tech giants, become wealthy, but do it in a way that serves society overall. Socialism with Chinese characteristics, 21st century socialism, has kind of solved some of the problems that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. They have brilliantly figured out what is it that attracts people to Western capitalism, and then they have used that to strengthen the state-controlled economy of China. Right? They've basically stolen the thunder of Western capitalism. The Western capitalist argument was, sure, we have poor people, we have economic insecurity, but every so often you get somebody who has a new idea and they go out and they start a company and they live out their dream and they're full of hope and optimism. Well, now you can have that in socialism. You can have Jack Ma's in socialism. You can have tech millionaires in socialism. You can have socialism in which there is a planned economy, but there is also innovation and creativity. You can have state-controlled capitalism. You can have capitalism with people starting new businesses and all that, but overall, the state, the socialist government, has the power. You know, it's funny, you get a lot of people that will like Venezuela, but they'll say they don't like China. Well, in China today, the state apparatus in China is much bigger than the state apparatus in Venezuela. In Venezuela, the government controls the oil and it dispenses the oil money, subsidizes a lot of private businesses. But in China, the state controls the steel industry, the biggest steel industry in the world. The state controls the banking sector, a huge banking sector. The state controls healthcare. The state controls a lot of things in China, a lot more things than it controls in Venezuela. If you equate socialism with state ownership, China is more socialist than Venezuela. However, that's not the definition of socialism. Socialism is not when the government does stuff. Socialism is when the state plans the economy. When the economy is not under the control of private capitalists who are just trying to make a huge amount of profits. When the economy is organized by society to serve the people, not to serve the profits of a small ruling elite. That is the definition of socialism. Capitalism is profits in command. It is the rule of the dollar. It is when big corporations and banks run the economy and the people are left behind and no one cares because the rich are just trying to get richer and they have no loyalty to society. But when the state controls the means of production, when society has taken control of the economy and the economy is forced to work for the benefit of all the people, that is what socialism is. And China, despite its flaws, and yes, there are huge flaws there are huge problems with corruption. I'm not an apologist. I'm not going to sit there and tell you their system is great, and no one there, even the most fervent supporter of the government, is going to tell you that it is. They know that they have big problems they have to tackle. But overall, socialism with Chinese characteristics, that model, where they use the strengths of capitalism to build socialism, has been highly, highly successful. And if we could take control of the economy in the United States, if we had a government of action that would control the economy and force it to work in the interests of ordinary people, we could make the United States better than it's ever been. If we had an operating modus with the rest of the world, a modus operandi of win-win cooperation, not twisting people's arms and demanding they buy our products, but instead, win-win cooperation, developing impoverished countries, helping them build infrastructure, helping them build up their economy while we build up our economy, controlling the economy. If we had that, we could have a very, very, very wealthy country in the United States, and we could be helping the rest of the world to get wealthy at the same time. There would be no contradiction, right? I really do think that the basis of so much of what is wrong with the world, the basis of it is when you decide that the pie is only this big, right? When the pie is only this big and the pie can't get bigger, right? When you make that decision, you're going to have a disaster because then everyone can only gain at the expense of somebody else. When the pie is only this big, right? Then you start fighting over how big of a slice you get, how big of a slice somebody else gets. But if you decide that the pie can keep growing and that with our creativity and our brilliance as human beings, that we can grow the pie indefinitely, and we can keep growing the pie can just keep getting bigger. If we use our creativity and our understanding of science and our ability to make tools and our ability to solve problems as human beings, if we unleash human creativity and we can keep the pie expanding, that is how you can get out of a disaster. If you want a fascist state, if you want totalitarianism, if you want wars, if you want people beating down other people, if you want people torturing other people, if you want police states, if you want poverty and genocide, the way you do that is you tell people, look, the pie is only this big, so fight it out, battle royale, who gets a bigger slice? Do you get a bigger slice or do you get a bigger slice? That's how you do it. But socialism and Marxism if you read Capital, is based on this understanding that, yes, the pie can constantly get bigger. Expand the pie. And people say, well, that's Caleb. Caleb, what about global warming? What about climate change? Well, folks, climate change is absolutely a real problem. And the way to get through climate change and the way to solve climate change is with science and with scientific research. We should have fusion energy right now. There's no reason we should be stuck on the trap of fossil fuels, right? We should be funding like crazy scientists and engineers and thinkers and innovators to get us out of the trap of fossil fuel economics, of the fossil fuel economy, where Wall Street and London and their oil giants, the oil banking elites control the world economy and have it cornered. Yes, global warming is real, climate change is real. However, the way to solve climate change is not by making everyone poor. And that is the thinking, that is the mindset of the sinister forces that are in the same party as these optimistic, beautiful forces in the Bernie movement. It's very, very weird, right? When it comes to climate change, these are the two mindsets, right? So you got, on the one hand, you got this kind of this bitter old man stuff going on, right? You got the elderly old man who's like, climate change ain't real. It snowed yesterday. It snowed, so climate change isn't real. It's just something those darn greenies made up to cut into my money, and I don't like it. Right? That's the mindset of your fracking companies and your oil tycoons and the Koch brothers, right? The Koch brothers, who their father was Fred Koch, and the small oil companies who feel like, basically they feel like climate change is going to cut into their ability to get rich. They're trying to compete with the big four super major oil companies, and they just climate change, it can't be real, and they're going to pay for as much research ever to prove it's not real, cut it out, stop it, climate change, it's fake, it's something the commies made up, it's not real. That's their mindset. That is how they see things, on the one hand. You got that. But then, in addition to that, and I'm going to plug us in here so we get some more power. In addition to that, you've got a mindset that basically says, oh yeah, climate change is real. Climate change is totally real. This is the big four oil companies, the super majors. This is how they see things. Yes, climate change is real. And because of that, all you developing countries around the world, you got to just stop growing, right? Russia, you got a big fuel and, you got a big oil and gas energy market. You can't do that, right? Now, we'll stay where we're at. We'll stay controlling the economy, and we'll keep getting rich off of fossil fuels. But Libya, Venezuela, Iran, got to take a cut, guys. Sorry, for the environment, right? For the environment. Right? For the environment, that's the mindset. You got big oil that believes in climate change and thinks it's a rather convenient truth. It's not an inconvenient truth, but a rather convenient one, because it can shut down all their competitors. And then you've got the little oil, the fracking companies that are like, it ain't real, and they're yelling about it. Climate change is real, and the way out of climate change is to get out of the trap of fossil fuels. And that is why China has just pushed electric cars like crazy. They are pushing electric cars in China like crazy. I'm trying to figure out how I can plug us in here, because we need to get some more power. They are pushing fossil fuels in China, not fossil fuels. They're pushing electric cars like crazy. And they're doing it because they want us to get out of the trap of the fossil fuel economy. And part of that is about China's specific geopolitical circumstances. China is a country that unfortunately does not have very much oil and gas. So they have to import their oil and gas. And because they have to import it, that's a weakness, right? At any point, the South China Sea, take that South China Sea situation there, right? China knows very, very well that at some point the United States government, could go in that South China Sea, set up some kind of naval blockade, and basically cut off their ability to import oil. And that's a weakness that China has. Their economy would come to a grinding halt if they could not import any oil. They would be in a very, very bad situation if they couldn't import oil. It would be a disaster for the Chinese economy. They would be in a really bad situation. And because of that, China very much wants to not be dependent. That's why they're trying to secure the South China Sea. They want to make sure that those oil tankers can keep coming into the country. So there's no problem there. And why is there all this anger, I must say, about China controlling the South China Sea? Meanwhile, this is the United States, right? We are on the other side of the world. Why are we demanding that we control the South China Sea? How would we feel if China was in the Gulf of Mexico and was furious that we had ships there and was demanding that we stop having ships in the Gulf of Mexico, right? That would be ridiculous. I think that would just be absurd, and everybody would know how absurd that was if we were demanding that the United States stop controlling the South China Sea, stop controlling the Gulf of Mexico. A lot going on here, folks, but I gotta tell you, these young people that are part of the Bernie movement, they're full of hope. They're not where I'm at ideologically. Most of them don't really want socialism. What they want is a bigger social democratic welfare state. They want an economy that serves public good and not profits. And they want a better life for their kids. They want to be able to grow up and live the American dream. And the American dream has just been robbed from them. It has just been robbed from them by these huge international corporations. It has been robbed from them. And they want a better future, and they're full of optimism, and they want to solve climate change. They want to solve so many of the problems that we have. That's what's going on here. Shout out to Ramiro. Shout out to Eve from Civic Matters. Shout out to Doug. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about here. I am gonna let you all look at my bookshelf for just one quick second while I fix a technical problem that we are having. But somebody give me a shout out. Tell me what you want to learn about while I let you all look at my bookshelf for just a quick second and I solve a quick technical problem that we are having here. And the problem is solved. There you go. Thank you all for waiting. What a day this is. This is definitely guerrilla radio. But that's the thing. I'm real, okay? No big oil company is paying me to get on here and talk to you all. I'm doing this from my Brooklyn apartment here. I'm happy to be here. I love you all. You're here with me. You're patient, and I appreciate it. So much that we can be talking about. Thank you for joining me here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. So much on my mind these days. So much that we can talk about. Thank you for your patience. Now, I wanted to also talk about the fact that, now, I don't know how many of you watched that video I made from the Bernie rally in Brooklyn here, right? And I went to the Bernie rally and I talked to a number of Bernie Sanders supporters. But I also talked to a Trump supporter in that video, right? And he was just there. He was protesting, kind of protesting against Bernie Sanders. He had a sign, and he anti-Bernie Sanders, I guess you could say. He was a Trump supporter. He wasn't hostile. He was just there saying, hey, I'm a Trump supporter, everybody, just so you know. So anyway, I engaged with the guy on the video, and if you watch the video, we started talking about Venezuela, and he actually agreed with me. He actually, he said, yeah, the reason we're going after Venezuela is because of the oil. So lo and behold, we're there, and some of the students who were promoting this event, the Students and Youth for a New America group and the Center for Political Innovation, they had like a forum 2 days ago, and they had me give a presentation on what a revolution actually is, and the video is going to be up soon. But one thing that's rather interesting is that Trump supporter in that video, who became kind of famous after that little video, so many people left comments about him and all of that, well, lo and behold, he came to the event. He came to watch my presentation after he got a flyer about it from the students. His name's Mark. He's a nice guy. I'm sure he doesn't agree with me at this point, but he was there. He was there for the class, and actually the discussion that we had at this class was very much, I would say helped by this Trump supporter. He was a great friendly guy. I hope he's watching right now. Shout out to you if you are watching right now, Mark. It was a great conversation. And this class we did, what is the actual nature of revolution? It went pretty well. And because he was there, because he had the conversation, it was great. And I'm really, glad he was there. And so you all are going to see him when you see the video because he really enhanced our conversation. And so many people complimented me in the comment section on the fact that I engaged with that Trump guy. I didn't just shout at him. I didn't just call him racist and tell him to go away. I engaged with him. And you know what? A lot of the Trump people throughout the country, I've been joking on here about bitter old men and such, but a lot of the Trump people, a lot of the people who voted for Trump, have basically the same concerns that those young Bernie Sanders kids have. The same concerns. They're worried about the dropping standard of living. They're worried about the crumbling infrastructure of the country. They're worried about so much. They have some of the exact same concerns that these young people have. And they're worried about their future. And there you go. I mean, that's something that we need to keep in mind. And that brings me to a point that I made in this class with these students, which is, at any point, you should be able to have the conversation and be able to say to people what you would do if you were president, right? And that answer can't be, I don't want to be the president, I want a violent revolution. That's not an answer, right? A violent revolution is something that no one in their rational mind wants. Anyone who's actually lived through a violent revolution never wants to experience that again. Violent revolutions only happen when people have no choice, when they're up against a wall, when they have no alternative but to pick up the gun because they are being killed. It's a kill or be killed situation. And, at no point do rational human beings want to have a violent revolution. But regardless, the Communist Manifesto, interestingly, was published in 1848, and toward the end of it, he talks about a line of march, right? And basically, in any situation, people should be able to answer the question, what would you do if you were president? And that answer shouldn't be the same as what the liberals are advocating, right? It should be a unique answer. What would you do? And you constantly have to be asking yourself, what would you do? And you need to have an answer, a concrete answer. I can tell you one thing. In New York City, if we had a government of action, if we had a socialist government, they would immediately solve the problem with public transportation, right? People talk about fossil fuels, right? We need public transportation more than ever. I mean, New York City's subway system is the best in the country, and it's still pretty crummy, I'll be honest. Right? But we need public transportation. We need people to be able to drive something other than a car, get to work in some way other than getting a car. So why in the world has the city of New York allowed the public transportation system to fall apart? One thing that is just a big pet peeve of mine, is the fact that in New York City, our subway system slows down when it rains. When it rains. Not when it snows, not when it's like flooding, no, when it rains. When there is a rainy day, all of a sudden, the subway system of New York slows down. And the trains are full of people, and you can't have a seat on the train, and you got to stand. And you're waiting in the subway station for that train, and it keeps, it says 5 minutes, and then it goes up to 7 minutes, and you don't know when the train is coming. Because it rains. Because it rains. This is the richest city in the world. This is the home city of Wall Street. This is the capital of capitalism, right? This is the richest city in the world. This is the center of the global economy. And we have a train system that is so bad that even though it's underground, which that's beyond me, why is it that when it rains, our train system stops working? This is the height of weakness. People come to the United States from China, which is a developing country. This is a country that, 40, 50 years ago was one of the poorest in the world. And they're blown away by the fact that the United States, the subways in New York City, in the capital of capitalism, are crumbling. If we had a government of action in New York City, we would immediately fix the public transportation system. We would tax Wall Street. We would immediately fix the public transportation system. And if it were up to me, we would hire the China Railway Corporation. We would hire them. They make the fastest trains in the entire world. They're building trains all over the world, in Africa and Malaysia and different places like that. We would hire them, and we would have a fast, exciting new subway system like that, right? And we would hire unemployed people to start building it, and we would have a new subway system. That's what a government of action would be doing. The only reason that we don't have a new, efficient, clean, exciting subway system in the city, it's not because of the unions, it's not because of the government, right? The MTA doesn't actually belong to the government. It belongs to a what they call a public beneficent corporation. It's a private company that's facilitated with a state monopoly by the government. The MTA is owned by, it's got a board with people that are tied in with all the big banks. It's got corporations investing in it and lending it money, making profits. And yet, the city facilitates it, and we get crap service, and it's awful, right? If we were to really solve it, we would renationalize the subway. It would become public property. The city maintains it. The city ought to own it. And then we would hire the Chinese corporations to make the subways run on time. It would be that simple, right? I mean, it's just kind of basic 101. If you're going to have a city full of commerce and prosperity, with people making lots of money and getting jobs and investing and all of that, you got to have trains that work. It's kind of basic, right? I'm sure there's somebody watching this now who's saying, I knew Caleb was a fascist. He wants to make the trains run on time. Oh, we knew it. Caleb's Benito Mussolini. Well, that's obviously not the case. I think a lot more people want to improve the public subway system than just fascisti. And in fact, I think all the right-wing people in the United States at this point are all, free marketeers. We don't need public transportation. That's the government. Everyone should just drive a car, and we don't privatize everything, right? I mean, but regardless, right? Yes, we need to fix the public transportation system. Another thing we ought to fix here in New York City is the price of rent. I mean, it's through the roof, right? I mean, I live out in Bay Ridge. It takes me about an hour to get to Manhattan every day, right? And the amount of rent that I'm paying out here is ridiculous. To live in Manhattan, forget it. Forget it. I mean, you're paying at minimum like $3,000 a month. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? How in the world are you supposed to have a prosperous city if people can't afford to live here, right? There are certain forces that want this city to basically just be a playground for rich kids from all over the world. All the kids of the millionaires and billionaires from around the world, they want them to come to New York City and smoke the marijuana that they're only supposed to get a ticket for, and go to dance clubs and party, and I mean, it's so ironic, right? Years ago, New York City, Greenwich Village, used to be the home to a lot of starving artists, right? A lot of the famous writers, the beatniks and others, lived in New York City, and they lived here because this was a cultural hub, and they were desperately poor, trying to make it as artists, and they lived in these apartments in Greenwich Village that were very cheap because they were very poor, and they were trying to get by, and they were making innovations in art and such. Now, to live in Greenwich Village costs an arm and a leg. It's super, super expensive to live in Greenwich Village. And it's populated not by starving artists who want to make cutting-edge breakthroughs in the arts and do things that have never been done before and are drawn to live here because it's a cultural hub. Now it's populated by rich kids, the kids of millionaires and billionaires, who are paying for the experience, I kid you not, of pretending that they are famous writers in science, right? They don't ever have to actually have a job, so their parents give them a little check, and they live in Greenwich Village, and they're pretending to be F. Scott Fitzgerald, they're pretending to be Ernest Hemingway, and they're sitting there, and they're just pretending, right? And they're paying, they've driven the price of rent through the roof, and the reason that the rent is through the roof is that there are huge numbers of empty housing units in this city, right? Of empty apartments. Because at this point, a lot of the landlords don't make money from people living in apartment buildings. They make money through speculation. Real estate speculation. They buy a property, they fix it up a little bit, they wait for the market to improve, they sell it, and they make a profit. They flip it, right? Houses are no longer for living in. Housing at this point in New York City is so bankers and landlords can make profits. It's a big stock market. It's a big game where people are making money out of nothing, right? The housing market has become the new stock market. It's a place for people to gamble. And yes, they want the rich kids to be able to live here and live in their second home somewhere else. And they want to turn this city basically into a giant playground for millionaires and billionaires from all over the world. They want to drive the working families out. It's really scary what they're doing. But if we had a government of action that worked for the people of this city, they would start taking swift action to drive the cost of rent down, to fix public transportation, and to make this city hospitable for the people who live here and work here, not for rich tourists who live here 1 month out of the year and live in other urban centers and just want to party and celebrate all the time. What they talk about gentrification and that's a whole, that's a whole big issue, but basically it gets down to that under capitalism, in the system where profits rule, where you don't have a government of action that controls the economy, at that point, when you have a system based on profits, houses don't exist so that people can have housing. Houses exist so landlords and bankers can make money. And that's the problem that we have in this city. And all across the country, in suburbs and in rural areas, you have the opposite problem. You have the opposite problem, which is that the property values are dropping. You have families that saved up their whole life and put so much of their hard work into paying their mortgage and getting their home, and then they turn around and the value of their home plummets, right? Midwestern homes are not worth anything. I mean, there's a joke they used to talk about in Cleveland. You could buy a home for the price of a VCR, you know? I mean, it's like, so the housing market all throughout, you know, most of the United States, the heartland, the suburbs, the rural areas is plummeting. Meanwhile, in urban areas, it's going through the roof. It's just a disaster. You need the government, you need the state to step in and protect the interests of the population. That's what is needed now more than ever. And again, we don't have it because the government simply works and functions as a middleman for the ultra-rich. It simply protects the private property of those who already have, the rich and powerful. And that's a problem. Wow, so much that we can discuss on here. So many exciting things happening in the world. What else do I want to talk about going on here? You know, I wrote an article. It was published. I sent it out in my newsletter. If you haven't subscribed, you ought to subscribe. It's called the Octant. You can visit my website. You can just enter your email. You can subscribe to the Octant and get my newsletter that comes out periodically, a few times a month, and where it has my articles and various videos and journalism that I've done. So if you want to subscribe, I recommend you do that. But the lead article in the latest issue of the Octant that I put out was about Trump versus Bezos and the divisions within the American ruling class that are going on right now. And that Jeff Bezos and Donald Trump represent different strata within the American ruling elite, right? So on the one hand, you know, Jeff Bezos is a tech millionaire, a tech billionaire. He's actually the richest man in the world according to how much money he has, right? He has the most amount of wealth of anyone in the world. He's Amazon.com. He's the Washington Post. He's bald, and he's a tech billionaire, a tech tycoon. He's a liberal. He's a Democrat, but he doesn't like the Bernie people. He's one of those evil people that run the DNC. And he basically doesn't care for Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't care for him. We know about the National Enquirer scandal, everything that went down with talk of photographs of genitals and all this silliness. You know, Lenin talked about the pornographication of politics, you know, and how the bourgeoisie offers pornography instead of politics. We got a scandal about the genitals of what's his name, of Jeff Bezos. It's all silly, but behind it, there's some big divisions. Because where did Silicon Valley come from, right? And this is a little known fact, but it's very easy to document, is that during the Cold War, the United States realized that it had a lot more money than the Soviets had. And the Soviets were spending a lot of their money on defense and just trying to fortify the country. And the USA realized that there were some cutting-edge breakthroughs going on in the computer area, basically. But the free market, it wasn't just going to happen naturally at the free market. So the intelligence agencies, the CIA, basically started funneling huge amounts of money into Silicon Valley, into Apple, into IBM, and basically setting up for the United States to be the leaders of the computer market, right? The government, right? You know, it's so silly. All these tech people like to say, oh, it's capitalism made computers. No. The government, the U.S. intelligence agencies poured huge amounts of money into trying to make Silicon Valley and the United States and Southern California into the center of the global computer revolution. And the tech giants of today very much are the result of the U.S. intelligence agencies strategically deciding to build up the computer departments, right? And that's where they came from. And if you look at them, in some cases, it's very blatant. I mean, there are individuals, for example, with Google Alphabet. There was an individual who worked at the State Department. He worked with Condoleezza Rice. He worked with Hillary Clinton. And he was also like one of the Google Alphabet, Google Ideas guys. During the Arab Spring, he was basically coordinating social media work with the State Department of the United States. These tech giants are very much tied in with the intelligence agencies of the United States and with the U.S. government, and they always have been. And if you look at it, right, so the Council on Foreign Relations, that is the most powerful think tank in the United States, probably the most powerful think tank in the world. Who pays for it? ExxonMobil and the Ford Foundation. They basically pay for it. That's who pays for the Council on Foreign Relations. And the Council on Foreign Relations is basically the CIA's brain. It's where U.S. foreign policy is thought up. And the Council on Foreign Relations of ExxonMobil, tied in with the tech giants of Silicon Valley, they represent what you could call the entrenched power in the United States, the old money, right, of the richest of the rich. That's one faction. And Jeff Bezos is the most visible leader of that faction, right? He's in with the Rockefellers and ExxonMobil. He's in with the Ford Foundation. He's in with, I mean, you name it. He's in with the entrenched power, with the Morgans, with the DuPonts, with the Vanderbilts. He's in with them, and they tend to be more Democratic. Warren Buffett, he said, tax me more, right? Tax me more. If you need to tax me more, I can afford it. I'm super rich. Plus, the government's in my pocket, so I can arrange that it'll be rigged in my favor. So, yeah, tax me more. There's kind of a more liberal faction that represents the richest of the rich. Meanwhile, you've got a lot of millionaires and billionaires that are not part of the club, right? Take Betsy DeVos. She's the Secretary of Education that Trump appointed. Betsy DeVos, not a big fan of the woman. She's all about privatizing schools, which Obama was about too, but she's really into it. She's all, she's tied in with military contractors. She's not a big lady. I'm not defending her. But where does her wealth come from? Where did Betsy DeVos's millions and billions come from? How did she become the wealthy woman that she is today as she runs the U.S. Department of Education? Her money came from Amway. Does anyone know what Amway is? Amway is a multi-level marketing scheme. It's Tupperware parties, right? That's where she got her wealth from. Betsy DeVos is the Amway millionaire. The Amway billionaire. That's the family, and now I guess she's tied in with Blackwater and some military corporations. But at the end of the day, that's who she is, right? She's not, she's not an oil baroness. She's not from one of the ruling families. She's not tied in with the Republic Steel. She's not, with the Morgans. No. She's Betsy DeVos. Her wealth comes from Amway. From people having Tupperware parties. From people selling knives, right? And this multi-level marketing scheme that rips a lot of people off. I mean, people call it a pyramid scheme. I guess legally that's not correct. They've avoided any legal stipulation. But her money comes from Amway. Basically, if you've ever seen the show The Beverly Hillbillies, right? That's basically the Trump administration, right? They're millionaires and they're billionaires. But the other billionaires and millionaires look at them like, oh, yes, right, the new money, right? And this lower level of the rich, right? They actually believe the free market stuff, right? They got rich, so why can't everybody else, right? And the government ought to keep its hands off and let other people become really, really rich and let them be really, really rich. And they have resentment against the entrenched old money families, those entrenched old money ruling elite families that basically have the government rigged in their favor. So they tend to be more libertarian, they tend to be more free market, and they tend to have a resentment against the old entrenched power in the United States. And that old entrenched power, they've been playing this game for years. They know that there's a possibility that things could go wrong and that you need to think long term and you need to control public opinion and you need to feed the rabble, give them their food stamps so that they don't riot and revolt, let the little people do their thing, right? And that's the division. It's kind of like that division between big oil and little oil. Big oil believes in climate change and thinks it's rather convenient because it can put all of its competitors out of business. And little oil doesn't believe in climate change. It's Atlas Shrugged versus Nudge by Cass Sunstein, right? That's basically what's going on here, right? We have a division between the richest of the rich and the wider, bigger layers of capital that are not part of that elite club. And the CIA and the intelligence agencies and ExxonMobil and the Council on Foreign Relations and Silicon Valley, they work for that wealthy, ultra-entrenched, old money faction. Whereas Trump, he represents the millionaires and billionaires that are locked out, right? One thing that Trump did that I think is actually good is his federal prison reforms, right? He's getting rid of these mandatory minimum sentences. He's letting a lot of people out of federal prison. Good for him. And the reason he's doing that, as has been pointed out by a number of people, is because have you ever noticed that every rich person who's ever gone to jail is a Trump supporter? All the rich guys who aren't rich enough to buy their way out of a prison sentence for insider trading, who get caught, snorting coke during their Wall Street tycoon days, all the rich guys who end up going to jail for not paying their taxes and all of that, who aren't rich enough to have the system rigged in their favor. They're rich, but they're not rich enough to be above the law and end up going to federal prison. Those guys all like Trump because they realize that Trump represents them. Trump represents Trump represents the sections of the rich that are locked out, that are not part of the club. That's who Trump represents, and that's the fight going on. Trump versus Bezos. It's Warren Buffett versus Sheldon Adelson. It's Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie, and DuPont versus the Beverly Hillbillies. That's the fight going on here. It's the rich versus the ultra-rich. That's the fight that we have going on here. And Bernie Sanders and the upsurge in the Democratic Party represents something very, very different. It represents the people of this country that aren't rich or ultra-rich, that are just trying to get by, just trying to have a decent country for their kids, who are sick and tired of what these ruling elites have done. And that is what's happening here. And it's beyond me to watch the most evil forces, the entrenched old money, aligned with the best hopeful and optimistic people. There are two Democratic parties at this point, and it's going to be an interesting election year. I'm excited when I meet these young people that work for Tulsi Gabbard. I'm excited when I meet these young people who work for Bernie Sanders. And even a lot of the Trump people, I meet them, I don't agree with them. I wish that they, there's that bitterness, there's that, that hostility to immigrants, that bigotry against Islam. It's just based on ignorance. But at the same time, I feel like even they want a better country, right? But, the folks at the top that are tied with these huge global multinational corporations, they don't want a better country, right? They want to make super profits, they want to control the world economy, and they want to beat down any competitor domestically or internationally. It is a very strange world that we have here. But folks, when I post that class that we just had in New York, you're going to love it, right? Because we had some great discussions, and it was interesting. There was a young woman who was like an environmental anarchist who was there. There was this Trump supporter guy, Mark was there. There were some of the young people from New School University that are with the Students and Youth for a New America Club. There were some people from Long Island that were tied in with Students and Youth for a New America. It was a great discussion, and I'm editing it. I always like to put a lot of pictures in there so you can see what I'm talking about, pictures from the past and all of that. Great discussion. Don't miss it. It's going to be up on the web. The Actual Nature of Revolution, class led by Caleb Maupin. Don't miss it. You are going to love it. Folks that were there, that were watching, know what I'm talking about. It was a magical, magical class, and we talked about all kinds of things. So stay tuned, because it'll be on the web shortly. But I wanted to talk about also, right now in Venezuela, more of this beverage that will not be named, no product placement here. In Venezuela right now, they just had a big power outage. And somebody posted on the internet, I believe it was Boots Riley, the rap artist from Oakland. In 2016, the opposition in Venezuela put up a bill for amnesty for basically all the crimes that all of them have been charged with. There's opposition in Venezuela. They've been blowing things up and engaging in street violence. And they put forward this bill that would basically grant amnesty for all of the things that they have done. And one of the things they listed in their amnesty bill that was put forward by the opposition in Venezuela, one of the crimes that they listed for amnesty would be sabotaging the power grid. Sabotaging the power grid, right? So basically, the government of Venezuela says this was sabotage. They say that there were forces tied to the opposition that made the power go out. And now we have basically the opposition has all but admitted that they're doing that. When they ask for amnesty for a crime, and they list the crime, and it's the same crime that they're now denying they did, it's starting to look to me like there's quite a bit of credibility in Maduro's claim that this was an opposition activity. And people are remembering the Allende coup in Chile, and how Richard Nixon and Make the Economy Scream and Henry Kissinger and all of them, one of the things that they did was they made the power go out, right? And that a lot of Venezuela's electricity comes from a single hydroelectrical facility. And if that hydroelectric facility gets messed up, then they have problems. And what's also interesting is that there are people not in Venezuela, in other countries, over the border, who get power from that same facility, and they haven't been able to pay for it because of the sanctions that have been put on Venezuela. Venezuela has not been able to collect money for electricity that it is providing to people outside of Venezuela with its publicly owned hydroelectrical facility. So basically, Venezuela is giving free power to people, and they haven't turned it off because they don't want it to go out there. They don't want the bad PR that they're going to get of, all these people saying, oh, Maduro, the dictator, took our power away. So they're giving free power to people over the border right? That's what's happening right now. So Venezuela is basically giving free electricity to people in other countries while trying to keep the opposition and the right wing from sabotaging their hydroelectrical facility. And I might add, just because I want to throw it out there, just because I feel like saying it, anybody who tells you socialism doesn't work is just out of their mind. The biggest hydroelectrical facility in the entire world today is the Three Gorges Dam in China. It is the biggest power plant, and it was built by the Chinese government. And back in the 1930s, when the USA was having a Great Depression, when Western Europe was having a Great Depression and people were rioting for bread, the Soviet Union built the biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the world, the Dnieper Dam, a huge hydroelectrical facility. And what is the biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the Middle East? Well, it's the Aswan Dam that was built by Abdul Nasser, the Arab Socialist president of Egypt during the 1950s, and it was built in coordination with the Soviet Union, right? So the biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the Middle East was built by socialism. The biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the world today is in China, and it was built by socialism. The biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the world back during the Great Depression was also built by socialism. So if you think socialism, well, they can't do anything, they never get anything done. Well, actually, they built the biggest hydroelectrical power plant. And interestingly, when I was in Brazil, I found out that under the Lula da Silva government and under the government of Dilma Rousseff, that China was going through Brazil to areas in like the jungles, areas like in the Amazon rainforest that never had any electricity, and in coordination with the Brazilian Social Democratic government of Lula da Silva, they were building hydroelectrical facilities and bringing electricity to all these parts of Brazil that had never had it before. That was one of the achievements of Dilma Rousseff and Lula da Silva, was building electrical power plants and electrical facilities, hydroelectrical power in the Amazon rainforest. That was very, very, very cool. But what else is on people's minds here? A lot that we can talk about. I must say that there's so much pessimism in the world today. I really, really want to emphasize that belief that the pie can be only this big. When the pie is only this big, and the pie can only be a certain size, it can never get bigger. That is the basis for just dividing a society, for fascism, for wars, for genocide, for terror. Whenever you decide that historical progress must end, and that we've gone too far, we can't keep advancing as a species, we can't make new scientific breakthroughs, we can't advance, we've gone too far, that decision is the recipe for death. That is the death of a civilization, and that leads to people turning on each other. It becomes a fight over whose piece of pie is bigger, and that is a disaster, right? And if you look, and I talked about this in my class last night, if you look all through the history of the world, when societies face an economic crisis, you often will get a section of the ruling elite, a Bonapartist section, that figures out that it can take power by finding a constituency, a section of the population, and revving it up to attack and terrorize and beat down another section of the population, right? It's called whipsawing. Right? Back in the day, there was this thing they called a whipsaw, right? And it was a saw, and it had handles on both ends. And when one guy was pulling, the other guy was pushing. And when one guy was pushing, the other guy was pulling. It was a whipsaw. And two people would push and pull. And when the ruling elite of a country whipsaws the population, and they get one section of the population riled up to beat down another section of the population, that basically is the recipe for a disaster, right? And that's the recipe for mass genocide. That's the recipe for fascistic regimes and authoritarian police states. When the government, basically, when a faction of the government mobilizes one section of the population to terrorize and kill and beat down another section of the population, you are in big, big danger. Your country is your country is basically being set up for a disaster. And that socialist governments, right, historically tend to represent the entire population. They tend to put forward a line of march that represents the wishes of the entire population. They don't go along with that. They don't pick a constituency and mobilize it to beat down another section. They might make strategic alliances with one faction in the ruling class against another. That happens. That certainly happens. But when you get the population whipsawed, the way that's happening, that is very, very, very dangerous. And that's what's happening in the United States right now. The Democrats are serving the middle-class white urban liberals and the African-American and Black and Latino communities. And the Trump administration is serving the rural and suburban whites. All of these sections are suffering right now. The white middle class in urban areas, their standard of living is going down. The rent is too high. The wages are too low. Right? The African-American community is suffering horrendously right now. Police brutality, last hired, first fired. The white working class is also suffering, right? I mean, the opioid epidemic. Everybody is suffering during this crisis. And the ruling class of the United States is trying its hardest to whipsaw the population, right? If you don't like Trump, you need to get in line with the Democrats and beat down those white workers. And if you like Trump, you need to get in line with Trump, and you need to beat down those African-American folks and immigrants and those urban liberal kids who are stuck up and think they know everything. They're trying to whipsaw the population. That's what's happening. And all the rhetoric that you hear from both sides about coastal elites, it's all designed to whipsaw the population. How can we mobilize the people on the coastal areas to beat down the people in the Midwest and South? How can we mobilize the people in the Midwest and South to beat down the people in the coastal areas and in the urban centers? How can we whipsaw the population? That's what the ruling elites want to do. The Trump faction, they've got their constituency. The Democratic leadership, the people at the top, they've got their constituency, and they're trying to whipsaw the population. But Bernie Sanders, again, this shows the dichotomy. I don't understand how there's one Democratic Party. I really don't. Bernie Sanders, what's been his mantra? He's been saying we need a 50-state strategy. Not a red state, blue state strategy, but a 50-state strategy. He's been trying to get the Democrats not to play along with this whipsawing game. And Tulsi Gabbard has made very similar statements. So there's a wing of the Democratic Party that does not want to whipsaw the working class of the United States. This is an interesting time that we are living in. I mean, you can make comparisons. I think that South Korea is a very good example, right? Why does South Korea have the economy that it has today, right? I mean, it drives me crazy. People hold up that map, right, of North Korea and South Korea, and they say, oh, look, well, South Korea is capitalist, and it's all lit up, and North Korea is communist, and it's all dark. That proves that capitalism works. Ha, 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 ha. Look how well socialism's working in the northern part of the Korean peninsula, Caleb. Ha, ha, ha. Look, we got this NASA photograph from space. It proves everything you need to know about capitalism and communism. Well, that's mythology. It's pure mythology. First of all, the North Korean economy, until the late 1980s, was actually doing pretty well because they were tied in with the Soviet Union, and they were booming, and the standard of living was rising, and I mean they lit things up, and they if you'd have seen a picture from space during the 1970s or 80s, it would have looked very different. But on top of that, how did South Korea have the strong economy that it does have today? How did they get it? Right? Did the South Korean government just say, every man for himself, no taxes, privatize everything, just everyone can do whatever they want, no taxes, privatize everything? That's what the idiots who put up that picture would like you to believe, right? South Korea is capitalist, it's like America, it's private. No, it's not. The Park Chung-hee government, Park Chung-hee, who was a military dictator during the 60s and 70s, Park Chung-hee worked with the Kennedy and Johnson administrations of the United States. And the Kennedy and Johnson administrations of the United States feared that there could be a communist revolution in South Korea. There had already been the April Revolution, where the dictator Syngman Rhee, who was the U.S.-backed dictator in South Korea, was brought down. So Park Chung-hee and the Kennedy and Johnson administration said, how can we prevent a communist revolution from taking place on the south of the Korean peninsula? How can we do that? That was the question that they were asking. And so they asked that question. And so what did they do? Well, what they did was they basically set up a steel industry that was basically government controlled. It's called POSCO. It's still around. Let me see what's going on with my phone here. It's called POSCO, and it's still around. It's a state-run